What if the poorest girl in the village married the poorest man she could find, only to discover he was hiding a kingdom beneath his silence? She had no shoes, he had no name. Together they were mocked, ridiculed, and cast aside. But one broken ring, one quiet vow, and one truth buried in the mud would rewrite everything. This is not a fairy tale. This is the story of how love, when tested by fire, becomes unburnable. Stay until the end. Because of the final secret, it will change the way you see loyalty forever. The morning mist wrapped the hills of Sycamore Creek like a whispered lullaby, soft and slow, as if trying to hush the hardship that lived within the village. Elena's feet were already coated in red dust by sunrise. Her sandals had broken the week before, and she hadn't bothered to fix them. She was used to the sting of stones, the sting of words, and the sting of being invisible. Her hands balanced a tray of bread rolls covered by an old checkered cloth, her daily offering to a world that rarely gave anything back. The scent of yeast and hope drifted behind her as she passed crooked fences and the bitter stares of neighbors who never saw her as more than that poor girl with no future. Elena's father sat silently by the wooden window of their crumbling hut, coughing into a handkerchief that never stayed white. He hadn't worked in years, and the medicine bills stacked higher than the firewood. Still, he smiled when Elena kissed his forehead before each trip to the village edge. "Sell every roll," he always said with a weak grin, "and buy back a piece of your dignity." But dignity, Elena had learned, was expensive in Sycamore Creek. Too expensive for a girl who walked barefoot. As she neared the last road where few dared to sell, the sky broke open with sudden rain. It felt like it always did here, without warning and without mercy. Elena ducked beneath a sycamore tree, clutching the bread close, but the bottom rolls were already soaked. She sighed, leaning back against the bark, raindrops mixing with tears she didn't admit were hers. That's when she heard it, a soft grunt, a curse, then the clinking of tools. Across the road, an old pickup truck sat tilted on the muddy shoulder, steam rising from its hood. A man, mid-30s, tall, soaked to the bone, was underneath the chassis, struggling with a rusted wrench. His clothes were threadbare, his boots falling apart, and his hair stuck to his forehead like he'd long stopped caring. Elena watched for a moment, debating whether to help. Her father had taught her to be kind, but the world had taught her to be careful. Still, kindness won. She stepped into the rain, approached him with careful steps. "You need help?" she asked softly. He slid out, surprised, blinking up at her through droplets. "Only if you've got a new alternator in that basket of yours," he joked, voice raspy but kind. She smiled shyly, lifting the cloth. "No alternators, just bread." He stared for a beat, then smiled. "God, that smells like heaven." She tore one of the dry ones in half and held it out. "Here, on the house." He hesitated, then took it with a nod of thanks, biting into it like it was the first thing he'd eaten in days. They sat beneath the sycamore as the storm calmed. He told her his name was Noah. No last name, no hometown, just Noah. Said he wandered from place to place looking for work, fixing things, keeping his head low. Elena didn't pry. She liked that he didn't look at her with pity or judgment, just curiosity. When she stood to leave, he said, "If you pass by again tomorrow, I wouldn't mind buying a roll or two if I've got the money." She nodded, already knowing she'd come whether he had the money or not. That night, as she lay beside her father, listening to the roof drip with every memory they tried to forget, Elena whispered to herself, "He was the first person who didn't look at my feet first." And in a village where your worth was measured by the shine on your shoes, that alone felt like a beginning. Noah didn't leave Sycamore Creek. Days passed, and every morning Elena found herself baking a few extra rolls, pretending it was routine when, in truth, she was hoping to see him again. And she always did. Same corner, same truck, with a hood that somehow always needed fixing. He never said much, but when he did, it was never meaningless. He asked her about her bread, how she learned to bake, what kind of yeast she used, if it reminded her of anyone. No one had ever asked about her bread before. Most just chewed and walked off. But Noah listened, not with pity, but like her words carried weight. She learned little about him, but enough to make her curious. He slept near the edge of the woods, by the old mill ruins, wrapped in an army blanket and smelling faintly of pine. He never complained about the cold, or the bugs, or the stares he got from villagers. Instead, he offered to help fix the torn thatch roof of her hut, and when her father's walking stick broke, Noah carved a new one by hand, smoother, stronger, made from the limb of a cypress tree. Her father looked at him differently after that, not as a stranger, but as someone who understood quiet respect. The villagers whispered, of course they did. That girl, Elena, has been hanging around that forest drifter. She should be careful. These men, they come with stories and leave with trouble. But Elena didn't care. Noah had never once asked for anything he didn't earn. He traded repairs for bread, chopped wood without being asked, and when the rains flooded the creek and nearly swept away a neighbor's cow, Noah was the one who waded in waist deep to pull it out. People began to nod at him in the mornings, less with suspicion, more with reluctant curiosity. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the sycamore tree, painting the sky in fire, Noah sat on the porch steps of Elena's house while she patched an old shirt of his. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It breathed like old fabric, worn, familiar, comfortable. "You ever think of leaving this place?" he asked. Elena glanced up. "Every day." He nodded. "What stops you?" She didn't answer immediately. "My father. And maybe the fear that out there I'd still be nobody. At least here, I know where I stand." Noah was quiet for a moment, then said, "Sometimes you have to leave the place where they tell you who you are, to become who you really are." In that night, Elena couldn't sleep. His words lingered like smoke in her lungs. She didn't know what future Noah came from, or why he never spoke of family. But she knew this. He was the only man who had ever looked her in the eyes like she was whole. Not a project, not a burden, just whole. So, when he asked her, 3 weeks later, on a misty morning after fixing the village well, if she would consider marrying someone like him, someone who had nothing but dirty hands and an honest heart, Elena didn't hesitate. She said yes with her eyes before her lips could even form the words. And when she told her father, he simply looked at her and said, "If this man sees the real you, then he sees more than this whole village ever has." The sun rose timidly that morning. Its light filtered through a curtain of mist that wrapped the village in a hush. Elena woke before the roosters, not because she had much to prepare, but because her heart wouldn't let her sleep. There was no gown, no veil, no bouquet, just a simple white dress her father had kept from her mother's youth, faded and fragile, but still intact. She wore it without mirrors, without powder, without perfume. Her hands trembled slightly as she braided her hair with wild daisies picked from the backyard. This was her wedding day, though if someone had passed by, they would have thought it was just another Sunday. Noah arrived exactly on time, wearing the same shirt he wore the day they met, but washed and neatly pressed. He had tied a red string around his wrist, something he said his mother once did before making big promises. He didn't carry flowers or a ring in a box. Instead, he held in his palm a small wooden ring, hand, carved from the branch of the same sycamore tree that had sheltered their first meeting. It was imperfect, scratched, a little uneven, but it was real. It was his hands, his heart, his vow. They stood beneath that sycamore now, where the ground was slightly damp, and the breeze still smelled of wet earth. Her father sat in a rickety chair nearby, eyes misty but proud. No priest came, no guests arrived. The invitation had been quietly ignored by the village. Most said it was a joke. How could two beggars marry each other and call it love? Some had scoffed aloud. Others simply rolled their eyes, but none came. Except one, a hunched old man with a crooked cane, the village beggar, who stood in the distance and nodded solemnly, as if blessing them with every wrinkle on his weathered face. Noah took her hands in his, and they said no vows, only truths. "I have nothing," he said, voice low, "but I'll build everything with you." Elena smiled, blinking back tears. "I never wanted everything. I just wanted someone who wouldn't leave." He slipped the wooden ring onto her finger. It stuck a little, but she didn't mind. She felt more married than any woman she had ever seen walk down an aisle. And when he leaned in to kiss her, it wasn't fireworks or music, it was breath. Real, shared breath, like the kind two people exchange before jumping together into something that might just last forever. That night, in the little hut that now belonged to both of them, Elena sat at the edge of their bed, feet bare as always, dress folded neatly across the chair. The sound of crickets hummed like applause just for them. Noah lit a single candle and whispered, "You sure about this?" She nodded. "I've never been sure of anything until you." They lay down together, not rushed, not desperate, just quiet and close, like the earth itself had exhaled to make space for their love. And outside, In the distance, the same villagers who had turned their backs whispered behind closed windows. But in that moment, Elena didn't hear them, because the only voice that mattered was the one beside her saying, "Good night, wife." The rainy season came early that year, drenching Sycamore Creek in a curtain of gray that made everything smell of clay and wet wood. Elena didn't mind. The rain meant she and Noah spent more time together indoors, talking, mending things, and learning how to exist in the same space without needing to fill every silence. It was peaceful until the day the envelope appeared. It was a Thursday. She remembers because she had just finished scrubbing the clay from the floorboards when she picked up Noah's jacket, hung carelessly over the windowsill, half drenched. As she shook it out to hang on the peg, something fell from the inside pocket. A thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed but damp, edges soft from moisture. Her name wasn't on it. It wasn't addressed to anyone, but it had weight, not just physically, but in the way it made her hands stop moving. She hesitated only a second before sliding the seal open. Inside were documents, not bills, not old letters, but crisp financial statements from a private banking group in Houston, the kind of paper with embossed seals and balances that had too many zeros to be a mistake. She blinked once, twice. The top line read, "Noah Alexander Stanton, account summary." Her stomach dropped. Stanton? Not just Noah? She didn't know that name. And more importantly, since when did someone with mud on his boots and calluses on his fingers have access to over 8 figures? The room suddenly felt colder. She stood in silence, staring at the numbers, the official stamps, the signature that matched the way he scribbled shopping lists. Everything else around her, the kettle, the bread, the candle wax, seemed to blur. Her husband wasn't who he said he was, or at least not entirely. When Noah returned hours later, soaked and laughing with an armful of firewood, he didn't notice the change in her posture, not at first. "You okay?" he asked casually, dropping the wood near the stove. She nodded too quickly. "Yes, just tired," but her eyes didn't meet his. That night, while he snored softly beside her, Elena lay awake staring at the ceiling, the envelope now hidden beneath her pillow. The next morning, she followed him, pretending she needed to pick wild herbs, but her eyes locked on his figure as he disappeared past the stream and into the woods. He always said he went to think, or to clear traps, but now every movement seemed coded, every step rehearsed. She watched from behind a tree as he pulled out a satellite phone, not a villager's device, not even the kind one would find in a pawn shop. It gleamed with encryption, its surface dry despite the mist. He dialed, waited, and then spoke in a voice she had never heard before. Not angry, not sweet, but commanding. "Yes, Mr. Lewis, I'll review the final terms before the weekend. No, don't transfer anything yet. Not until I'm sure." Then he paused, glancing over his shoulder, as if feeling eyes on him. Elena ducked low, heart pounding. She walked home alone. Her legs moved automatically, but her mind screamed. Who was he? Why lie? Why choose her? At dinner, she couldn't swallow. When he asked about her day, she muttered something vague. He noticed. His eyes narrowed for a split second. Barely, but enough. "You're quiet tonight." She forced a smile. "Just tired?" Again. Same excuse, but he didn't push. That night, she didn't sleep. She stared at the back of the man she had promised her life to, wondering how many versions of him she had yet to meet. Love, she realized, was no longer about bread and kind eyes and carved wooden rings. It was now tangled with questions, and she wasn't sure which would break first, her trust or the truth. Elena didn't follow him out of fear. She followed him because she couldn't breathe without answers anymore. The questions curled around her lungs like vines, tightening with every lie left unspoken. That morning, Noah kissed her cheek before leaving for his usual walk, and she smiled, just enough to keep the illusion intact. Then she grabbed her shawl, slid through the side path, and followed the path he always took into the woods. She stayed far behind, careful not to snap a twig or crush a leaf, her heart hammering louder than her footsteps. Noah moved confidently through the thick underbrush, like someone who had memorized every root and bend. Eventually, he stopped beneath a towering oak tree, where the forest opened slightly to a clearing. He took out the same satellite phone she had seen before, his fingers moving quickly as he tapped a code and pressed the receiver to his ear. His voice was calm, but not the voice he used with her. It was colder, sharper. "Yes, Mr. Lewis, I've reviewed the board notes. Tell them the merger is going through, but we will delay the announcement until after the third quarter, And pull the Singapore assets quietly. I want no press involved. Elena's breath caught. She stumbled slightly, her heel catching a root. The sound was soft, but Noah's head turned. He scanned the trees like a soldier in enemy territory. Elena pressed herself low against a fallen log, heart racing, willing the forest to shield her. He paused, then relaxed, thinking it was nothing. And one more thing, he continued. Don't ever send anything to this address again. It's not safe here. She doesn't know. Elena closed her eyes. Not safe. She doesn't know. She doesn't know. Her fingers dug into the moss beneath her, and for a moment, the betrayal burned so hot in her chest, she thought it might set the forest on fire. Noah ended the call, placed the phone back in his pocket, and began walking back toward the village. Elena waited until his footsteps faded. Then she stood. Mud clung to her skirt, her palms were scraped, but none of it mattered. She walked home slowly, her mind churning with every conversation they'd ever had, every detail he'd given her. Drifting worker, no family, a man with nothing. All of it was a lie. And yet, she remembered his hands, rough from chopping wood. The way he smiled at her father, the way he held her when she cried. Could someone fake all of that? When he returned that evening, the sky was still blue, but the air between them was already storming. He noticed it the second he stepped in. Something wrong? He asked, closing the door behind him. She turned from the sink and placed the bowl down, her voice low. Who is Mr. Lewis? The room went still. His body stiffened. He didn't answer right away. What did you hear? Enough, she said, voice trembling. Enough to know you've been lying to me, that you're not who you say you are. He took a step toward her, then stopped when she stepped back. Elena, please. No, she said firmly. You said you had nothing, that we were starting from the bottom together. But you're someone else, Noah. You have money, power, phone calls about mergers and assets. Who are you really? Noah looked at her for a long time. Then he walked to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down slowly. I never meant to lie, he began. I only meant to disappear. He stared at his hands, as if they still held the ghosts of the life he left behind. I grew up in boardrooms, private planes, charity galas. My mother died of cancer when I was 24. She was the only one in my family who still remembered what it meant to live without wealth. She told me that love found in privilege is always suspect, that people smile when you have money but vanish when you don't. He looked up, and for the first time, Elena saw something raw in his eyes, not cold calculation, but buried pain. So I walked away. I left everything, my accounts, my name, even my phone. I wanted to know who I was without all of it. I never planned on meeting you, but when I did, I couldn't go back. Elena swallowed hard. Her heart warred with itself. Hurt versus truth, betrayal versus tenderness. And now, she asked, now what happens? Noah stood, walked slowly to her, and didn't touch her. Now, I tell you everything. Not as Noah Stanton, heir to anything, but as the man who wakes up grateful every day just to hear your voice. She looked away, tears threatening. You should have told me. I don't know if I can forgive you. He nodded. I'll wait, however long it takes, because for the first time, I'm not afraid of being known, even if it costs me everything. Outside, the wind stirred the branches. Inside, silence settled between them like ash after fire. But in that silence, something survived. Not trust yet, but the beginning of a choice. For 3 days, Elena barely spoke. She moved through the house like a ghost wrapped in linen, doing what needed to be done, fetching water, baking bread, tending to her father, but her words stayed locked behind a wall Noah couldn't climb. He didn't try to push through it. Instead, he kept his distance, chopping wood in silence, cleaning tools, repairing the fence, anything to give her space while still being near enough if she needed him. On the 4th day, just as dusk painted the sky with amber light, she sat across from him on the porch, holding the envelope he thought had been long forgotten. Tell me everything, she said, voice steady but sharp as a blade. Start from the beginning. He nodded slowly and began, not with defensiveness, not with charm, but with something more naked. My full name is Noah Alexander Stanton. I was born into one of the wealthiest families in Texas. My father was a steel magnate, my mother, the only daughter of an oil dynasty. From the outside, it looked like we had everything, money, mansions, media attention. But inside, It was all images. My parents barely spoke to each other. I was raised by strangers who wore uniforms and called me sir before I could tie my own shoes. When my mother got sick, she begged me to promise her one thing: don't let money make you blind. She said love born in a castle often dies in the gutter. He paused, looking at the horizon like it might answer the questions he'd never voiced. After she passed, my father wanted to marry me off to the daughter of another empire. He called it a strategic alliance. I called it a cage. So I ran. I took only what I needed, enough to survive, nothing more. I changed my name, cut all ties, and promised myself I'd live simply until I found something, or someone, worth returning for. Elena's fingers curled tighter around the envelope. And when you met me, I was just a curiosity? He shook his head. No, you were the first real thing I'd felt in years. You gave me bread when I had nothing. You looked at me like I wasn't broken. I didn't tell you who I was, not because I didn't trust you, but because I was scared. Scared that if you knew, you'd stop seeing me and start seeing the money. She blinked back something heavy. But you made me believe we were equals. We were, he said, leaning forward. We are. The dirt on my hands may not have been necessity, but it became my truth. Because every nail I hammered beside your father, every night I slept on that thin mattress beside you, every time you smiled at me without knowing who I was, it reminded me of who I wanted to be. She looked down, voice quieter now. You changed my life, and now I don't know if it was real or part of your game. He reached out slowly, placing his hand over hers, not gripping, just resting like a question. I have no more games, Elena, only you, and I'm willing to walk away from everything again if that's what it takes to be honest with you. She looked up, tears brimming but not falling. Then don't walk away, but don't expect it to be easy. I don't, he said, eyes never leaving hers. I only expect it to be worth it. That night, she didn't leave their bed. She lay next to him, facing the opposite wall, silent but no longer angry. And in the dark, he whispered, "Thank you for letting me stay." She didn't respond with words, just reached back and took his hand. It started with a slip of the tongue at the well. One of the elders who'd once worked as a security guard in the city claimed he had seen that Noah boy in a newspaper years ago, standing beside a governor at some fundraiser. Elena overheard him, her spine turning ice. Within 2 days, the whispers spread like wildfire. Is it true? That man she married, he's rich? I heard he owns land in Houston, skyscrapers even. Our Elena, she married into that? And just like that, the same villagers who once scoffed at her, who crossed the street to avoid the barefoot girl selling bread, now turned up at her doorstep with smiles too wide and voices too sweet. Women who had never invited her in for tea now brought cassava cakes. Men who had once mocked Noah's patched shirts now asked him for advice on starting a business. Children who used to throw pebbles at their house now waved and called her Auntie Elena with sugar-coated tongues. At first, Elena tried to ignore it. She focused on her garden, on baking, on pretending things hadn't changed. But everything had. The grocer who used to shortchange her now offered her credit. The seamstress who once refused to mend her clothes now begged her to try a custom gown. The same church elders who said her wedding was a shame now asked if she'd sponsor new pews. One morning, as she walked through the market, a woman leaned over and whispered with forced admiration, "Look at her, married a nobody and ended up a queen, smart girl." Elena stopped, turned, and looked her dead in the eye. "No, I married a man, and he was already a king long before you found out he had money." But the stares didn't stop. Neither did the offers. Partnerships, land sales, invitations to dinners hosted by the same families who once pretended she didn't exist. Elena returned home that night with fire in her chest. She found Noah by the stove stirring a pot of soup. "They're changing, Noah, not for the better. They want pieces of you now." He turned, already knowing what she meant. "They never saw you until they thought you could give them something." She nodded, sitting heavily on the stool. "I used to think I wanted to be accepted. Now, I see their acceptance comes with a price." He walked over, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then don't pay it. Let them talk. Let them want. But we owe them nothing." Days later, the village held a small community festival, the same event Elena had been excluded from for years. This time, they asked her to cut the ribbon. "It would mean so much," said the head councilwoman, smiling too brightly. Elena took the microphone, looked out at the crowd, faces that once turned away from her father's broken sandals, now lit up with greed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply said, "Thank you for the invitation, but I won't pretend we've all forgotten who we used to be." Then she handed the microphone back and walked off stage, her hand wrapped in Noah's. The next day, someone painted "Fool's Wife" on their fence in red. Elena saw it, stared at it, then dipped a brush in white paint and calmly brushed over it, stroke by stroke, until the wall was clean again. And then, for the first time in her life, she smiled not because she was accepted, but because she was finally, truly free. It was a morning like any other, until the car arrived. Not the rickety carts the village was used to, nor the dented trucks that brought vegetables from nearby towns. This was a sleek black sedan, polished so perfectly it mirrored the sky. It parked just outside the fence, its engine humming with restraint. Elena stood at the door, wiping flour off her hands, and watched as a driver in a gray suit stepped out and opened the rear door. And then, she saw her. A woman in her late 60s, elegant in a tailored cream coat and pearls that looked older than most of the village's buildings. Her hair was silver, styled without flaw, and her heels clicked with authority as she stepped onto the dusty path like she wasn't afraid of getting her shoes dirty, because she never had to clean them herself. Noah came out of the shed with a wrench in hand. His face froze when he saw her. "Grandmother," he muttered. Elena's heart jolted. "Grandmother?" The woman barely glanced at him before her eyes landed on Elena, scanning her from top to toe. "So," she said, voice smooth as satin and sharp as glass, "you must be the girl." Elena stepped forward, offering a hand. "I'm Elena. It's nice to meet—" The woman didn't shake it. She turned to Noah. "She's quaint." Noah stiffened. "Don't," the woman sighed. "I came to see if the rumors were true, that my grandson, heir to the Stanton legacy, has buried himself in this mud hole and married— what? A baker? A peasant girl?" Elena's cheeks flushed, not with shame, but rage. "I didn't marry his name," she said evenly. "I married the man who carried water for my father, the man who fixed a roof without being asked, the man who lied to you." The woman cut in. "Yes, I imagine he's very good at pretending." Noah stepped between them. "That's enough." She raised a brow. "You always did confuse rebellion with character. But this—" She gestured around at the modest home, the dirt floor, the clothesline flapping in the breeze. "This is a phase, and phases end." Elena stared at her, then spoke calmly. "This phase you speak of built my dignity, rebuilt his soul, and taught us both what loyalty feels like. You're welcome to call it temporary, but in this house, it's real." The woman narrowed her eyes. "Let's see how real it feels when the money disappears. Do you think she'll stay then, Noah, or run the minute the pearls turn to pebbles?" Noah reached into his back pocket, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, and handed it to her. "Already done." She opened it. Her lips twitched in surprise. "You transferred the family trust?" "All of it," Noah said, "to a charitable foundation. In her name." The old woman's smile faded. "You'd throw away everything for her?" "I'd do it again," he said simply, "because I already lived once with everything and nothing. Now I'd rather have nothing and her." She stared at him for a long time, then turned to Elena. "You're not what I expected." Elena met her gaze without blinking. "You never expected someone like me to have value beyond what you could measure." There was silence. Then the woman turned on her heel. "We'll see how long this lasts." She stepped back into the car. The door shut. The engine started, and she was gone. Noah exhaled shakily. Elena reached for his hand. "You okay?" He nodded. "I thought she'd never show her face. I was wrong." Elena held his gaze. She wasn't the only one. And just like that, something in the air changed. Not broken, but tested, and stronger than ever. The letter came wrapped in navy blue parchment, stamped with the Stanton family crest. It arrived a week after Noah's grandmother had driven away, delivered not by a courier, but by a family lawyer who wore a somber suit and eyes too eager for comfort. He stood at their door, clearing his throat as if about to announce a death. "It's a matter of the will," he said. "Your grandfather's estate, there's been a change." Noah let him in with a wary nod. Elena poured tea but didn't touch hers. The lawyer laid out the papers like chess pieces. Columns of clauses, inheritance lines, and conditional transfers. Noah barely glanced at the figures. He wasn't surprised that most of the estate had been rerouted. What caught him off guard was the name signed under the motion for amendment. Jacob Stanton, Noah's cousin. They hadn't spoken in years. Jacob, once a thin, forgettable boy who trailed behind Noah at family functions like a shadow desperate for light, had grown into something far more dangerous. A man of ambition sharpened by resentment. The amendment was brutal. It painted Noah as irresponsible, reckless, and, most damningly, unfit to protect the Stanton legacy. It called into question his mental stability, citing his delusional attachment to rural simplicity and his questionable marital choices. Elena scanned the words, her chest tightening with every line. "He's trying to erase you," she whispered. Noah nodded. "He's not just trying to erase me, he's trying to bury me." The lawyer sighed. "There's more. Your grandfather had a second will, one that reinstates you as heir fully. But it was never signed. We found it in his study drawer, handwritten, dated the week before his stroke." Elena frowned. "So, it's not valid?" "Technically, no. Legally, it's complicated. But if challenged in court, with the right testimony, it could overturn the current arrangement." Noah stood slowly. He knew Jacob would come for the throne the moment he fell. That's why he wrote it. The lawyer nodded. "The only problem is, Jacob's already filed a defamation suit against you. He's accusing you of manipulating the family, abandoning your duties, and fraud." Elena's voice trembled. "Fraud? Claiming that your marriage to her was staged to gain moral sympathy before reclaiming power. He's painting her as a pawn, and you as the puppeteer." That night, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The wind outside shook the shutters like fists pounding on a door. Elena sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the wooden ring Noah had carved for her. "Am I your weakness?" she asked. He knelt in front of her, took her hand. "You're the only thing keeping me strong." She shook her head. "I don't want your war. I don't want your empire. I just want our life back." He rested his forehead against her knee. "Then let them burn it. Let them take the name, the buildings, the banks. I've already found what matters." The next day, their house caught fire. It started in the back room, the one where Noah kept old family files, heirlooms, and documents. The villagers rushed with buckets, shovels, anything they could carry, but by the time the flames were out, the evidence, the unsigned will, was ash. The police called it an accident. Elena didn't. "Jacob did this," she whispered. "He knew the paper could destroy everything he built on that lie." Noah didn't respond. He stood in the blackened doorway, eyes glazed, jaw locked. Then he said it, so quietly it was almost missed. "He didn't just burn my inheritance. He tried to erase my truth." Elena stepped beside him, soot on her face, eyes blazing. "Then we rebuild, not to fight them, but to show them what can't be burned." He turned to her slowly, and in that moment, Noah wasn't the man who had run from wealth, or the boy who had inherited nothing. He was fire, and the choice to use it for warmth or war was now his alone. They moved back into the ruins, not out of desperation, but out of defiance. Noah refused to leave the land where they had first built a life, with nothing but bread, a broken roof, and a promise. The walls were charred, the windows shattered, but the foundation held, and that was enough. Together, with help from a few villagers who had once whispered behind their backs and now came forward with open hands and quiet guilt, they began rebuilding, brick by brick, nail by nail. Elena mixed mortar with fingers still blistered from the fire. Noah hammered beams with arms that trembled not from weakness, but from resolve. At night, they slept on a mattress laid over the floorboards, beneath stars peeking through the holes where a ceiling used to be. News of the fire spread faster than the fire itself had. So did the rumors. Some said Jacob sent the arsonists. Others claimed it was Noah who set the blaze to play victim. None of it mattered. Noah didn't file a countersuit. He didn't call the press. He simply wrote one letter, a statement that said, "I don't want the fortune. I never did. All I want is for the name Stanton to no longer be used to silence truth." And then he signed it, not with his inherited surname, but with the name on their modest marriage license, Noah Elijah Gray. Weeks passed, then a month, and one crisp morning, as frost kissed the edges of the grass and the chimney coughed its first breath of smoke from the rebuilt roof, a black SUV returned, not the one that carried judgment, but one that carried closure. A young man stepped out, dressed in a suit, eyes tired but sincere. He introduced himself as Benjamin, a former aide to Noah's grandfather. "There's something he left behind," he said, handing Elena a small cedar box. Inside was a single photograph. Noah as a child, standing in front of a cabin, not unlike the one they now rebuilt, smiling up at his mother as she braided his hair. Behind it was a note, handwritten and faded with time. My son will find his crown not in gold, but in grit, and the woman beside him will shine brighter than any diamond I ever bought. Elena stared at the words for a long time before pressing the paper to her heart. She didn't cry, she didn't need to. She had already grieved everything that didn't matter. What remained was unshakable. Months later, the new house stood finished, not grand, but solid. People visited, some came to gawk, others came to apologize, but most came just to listen. Because Elena had started teaching bread making, budgeting, rebuilding with whatever life handed you, and Noah, he built a carpentry shop behind the house, teaching boys who had grown up thinking they had nothing how to make something with their hands. They didn't talk about the fire anymore. They didn't need to. It was written into every beam of wood, every smile exchanged in silence. Every evening they sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the sycamore that still stood, unburnt. One night, as they sat hand in hand, Elena turned to him and asked, "Do you miss it, the wealth?" Noah didn't answer immediately. Then he looked at her, eyes soft. "Only the parts that brought me here." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then I guess even the lies had their purpose." He nodded. "But they'll never be part of our truth again." And beneath the stars, with their house behind them and nothing to hide, they kissed like it was the first time. Because some houses can burn, but love, the kind built from ashes, truth, and a girl who once walked barefoot in the mud, cannot. They called her a fool. They called him worthless. They laughed at their tiny house and their wooden ring. But when the empire crumbled and the gold faded, only one thing still stood. A girl who never left. A man who chose truth over power. And a love the world tried to shame, but could never touch. So the next time you're tempted to judge a barefoot bride, or a man who carries wood instead of titles, remember this. Some crowns are worn in silence, and some queens never asked to rule, but the world will remember them anyway.